So this February, I was at The Hague in the Netherlands with a few friends for a Model UN conference. And one evening, we decided to go out for dinner. So what we had was this large group of people from all across the world, literally the fringes of this world, walking into a restaurant, and it was almost like the famous joke, an Indian, an American, and a Russian walk into a bar. And as we sat down in this pizza joint, our conversation eventually broke into what every teenager talks about in this prime of their life, politics. And as we were discussing politics, and when I mean politics, I don't mean discussions from the point of view of a political guru predicting the future and fate of our nation, or deciding how far left or far right we stood on the political compass. No, by politics, I mean political satire. We were just kicking fun and having a good time, making fun of the political histories of each of our nations across the table. And to be fair, as an Indian, I did receive quite a few of those jokes my way. But we also had a Russian on the table, so it did balance out. Now, while we were cracking these political jokes and going across the table, a Chinese-American friend of mine raised his hand and he said, well, you can make fun about me and you can make fun about the Tiananmen Square incident, but to be fair, I'll just deny it. And as he brought up this joke, as he said those words, this photograph popped into my mind. And I'm sure the minute I said the words Tiananmen Square incident, they popped into yours as well. It is, after all, the iconic photograph of an extremely epochal moment. It is, after all, the visualization of an extremely critical moment in human history. And as this photograph was at the back of my head, the famous photograph of the tank man from June 5th, 1989, and as I was ruminating in this photograph and this visualization, we moved across the table and we came across a Turkish friend of mine. And somebody brought up the Armenian Genocide. And at that moment, I realized I had no such visualization, no such visual aid, no such understanding of what was, I learned, an extremely crucial event in human history. So for those in the dark, the Armenian Genocide is an extremely controversial moment in human and Turkish history. It is an event that occurred after the First World War that involved the Ottoman Turks carrying out a massacre against 700,000 to 1.5 million Armenians. And it is highly controversial because we have the Turkish government maintain a formal stance that the event never occurred. And this extremely important moment in history, that is, well, as important, if not more important, than the Tiananmen Square incident, had no visualization. I had no way of knowing what this event was. There was no such immediate reaction from me to see what the genocide really was. So I go back to my hotel room, I open Google, and I look up the Armenian Genocide. And this is one of the first photographs that pops up. Now, this photograph is captioned, "Turkish official shows bread to starving Armenian children." And it is definitely an extremely jarring photograph, and certainly an extremely impactful moment. And at the moment when I saw this photograph, when I saw the starving children, when I saw the reaction of the Turkish official to them, I knew, you can't deny this event. This is real history. This is, after all, visual proof of an event occurring. This is, after all, actual proof of human violence, of the human, the villain in man. But then the IB historian in me kicked in, and I went through the sources and the origins of this very photograph. And I realized that people denied the existence or denied the validity of this photograph. And when I say people, I don't simply mean the Turkish government or sympathizers of the Turkish cause. I mean actual historians. Apparently, according to a lot of renowned universities, this photograph is forged. While they don't deny the actual incident or its occurrence, this photograph is believed to be this 1920s era propaganda piece that was made by cutting together two different photographs, placing them on the other, and splicing them to create this illusion of, well, the Turkish man taunting Armenian children. And when I looked into this history, and when I realized that this very important photograph that changed my perception of Turkish and the world history could have also been faked. And at that moment, I realized the value and the virtue of historic photographs. Not simply the matter or the moments that they capture, but the stories behind them, how they came to be, where they are, how they reached us today, and the stories that they reveal, and the challenges that they pose to modern history. Now, I would like to bring up Joseph Goebbels. I'm sure you've heard his name. He is considered to be one of the most evil men to have ever lived. He was the Nazi propaganda minister, the aide of Adolf Hitler, and you can see him here smiling, having a good time in 1933 Geneva. He was, in all senses of the word, a Nazi. But if we look into our history textbooks, if we look into the way history is taught to us, we realize that Nazism, or any ideology, is simply stupid, broken up in moments. We have the introduction of the ideology, we have a defining moment, and we have, all of a sudden, the next page describes how most of the population in that country has turned to this extremely hateful ideology. The transition period is never really captured by our literature. The transition period of man, who believes in one thing, for example, socialism, turning to an ideal that you could consider to be the polar opposite. what we see is significant differences in ideology, but no transformation captured in our modern history. And this is a problem throughout most of history. After all, your history textbooks are broken into events and leaders. We simply have all history textbooks broken up into the American War of Independence, the First World War, the Second World War, and the Cold War, often overlooking the moments in between, often overlooking the people in between, their cultures, their ideologies, their identities. And that is where historic photography thrives, the ability to capture transformation. Now, moments after this photograph was taken, the very same photographer took another photo of Joseph Goebbels. That's him again. You can see with him, with his eyes of hate, his eyes of anger, this maleficent look to the camera. You might be wondering what changed in these 30 seconds of the first and the second photograph. Well, Goebbels learned that his photographer was a German Jew. And in those moments, in that split second, his change of reaction from that smiling man, smiling from year to year, to this face of evil, is what tells you a lot about the Nazi ideology, or just any ideological transformation, and how deep-rooted it becomes in an individual, how impactful it becomes in their lives, and how important it becomes to them, and how it reflects in their actions and their reactions. So this historic photograph gave me, and I'm sure it did give you, a little insight into transformations of ideologies. But at the same time, it gives you a lot of insight into events that you never expect to have occurred. Now we can move halfway across the world and go to Korea in the 1950s. And as I'm sure you're aware, the Korean War was taking place, and we had every major Cold War power, from China, Russia, America, fighting over this border, deciding where North Korea and South Korea stretched, and definitely having, or coming as close to World War III as our world has ever seen. However, in that defining moment, if you scroll through Wikipedia, we learn that India had a significant role to play. By significant, I mean India played a diplomatic role. So we decided to send troops to both sides of the borders, and troops as in ambulance drivers, humanitarian aid workers, and such. We didn't take part in any military conflict in the actual Korean War. But as I read this, and as I flipped through the 300 people that India had sent to Korea, I was caught in disbelief. I wondered why a nation would send your men, your troops, your army, halfway across the world to fight for a war you didn't believe in. That too as ambulance drivers, who really didn't play an actual role, at least as I thought earlier, in the actual conflict. What difference would it make? But then I went through a few archives and I found this photograph. This, ladies and gentlemen, is an Indian ambulance driver in the fields of Korea, clenching his hands in intense pain as his leg has been blown off by a landmine. This, my friends, is a man on the ground. This, my friends, are the boots on the ground. This is the reality of India intervening or playing a small role in the Korean War. It really tells you a lot about the roles that the small people play in history. The small ambulance driver, the few hundred men who went out there, the people who somewhat made a difference, a change, but are often overlooked by history textbooks. He was no leader, he was no general, but he was a key player in this war, and definitely had a role to play in the way history was shaped. And he definitely suffered at the hands of this war, as you can see in the pain that he reflects in this photograph. Now, if you look at transformations through history, if you look at the actual changes, the metamorphosis, if I can call it, of ideology, of identity, what we can do through historic photographs is capture the zeitgeist of a time, of a place, of a people. We can understand exactly who they were and where they're coming from. This photograph, taken in 2009 in Papua New Guinea, tells us a lot about the reactions of individuals. So this is the first time men in the capital of Papua New Guinea have been introduced to contraception. And if you look at the reactions, we learn an absolute, what I can say, an absolute panorama of reactions, of disbelief. We have a man on the left showing anger. We have shame. We have confusion. We have fear. We have people from all walks of life in Papua New Guinea reacting to innovation, reacting to medical change, reacting to something that was supposed to and has made their life better. But their reactions tell us a lot about the people who they were and where they've come from. They tell us about the taboos that they face in their society, about the beliefs that they have, about what has changed from then and now, what have made these men react in such a way to medical innovation. Now, if you look at transformations, and if you look at transformations between then and now, there and here, if you look at the differences, the paradigm shifts in society, photographs often give us this visual stimulus that text does not. And this particular photograph is somebody's grandmother. It was posted on Reddit. And it's simply a woman cutting a birthday cake in the 1970s. Can anybody guess what country this is? Yes, sir? Any other guesses? Sir? This, my friends, is Iran, Tehran in 1973. This Iranian woman cutting a birthday cake is Iranians of the 1970s, well, dressing in this way, acting in this way. And truly, it is definitely a paradigm shift, quite a difference from the way we look at Iran today. Our perceptions of modern Iran post the Islamic Revolution, Iran currently having conflict with America, Iran currently that stands out as what can say a sore thumb in the Middle East. What we see, my friends, is a paradigm shift, a transformation between the Iran then and the Iran now. And while this does not offer much commentary on the actual revolution or on the key players of this battle, it tells us a lot about the culture and about the identity of the Iranian people, who they were, what they believed in, and where they are now. Now, transformation-wise, not only do we get to see transformations and changes in people, but we get to observe actual changes, the metamorphosis of a state, of where they stand in the world, of the role they play in global diplomacy. This is an Air India promotional poster from the 1960s. And the main appeal of this photograph is not the woman or the way she's putting up these weird clips on walls to indicate air flight timings. It is the list of countries that India used to fly to. Countries often represent soft power. They represent diplomacy of a state. The places your national carrier flies to represents your interest in those states, your relations with those states. And India in the 1960s, famously known as a non-aligned state, had no relation or had equal relation with both the USSR and America. And this list of countries, London, New York, Moscow, regular flights to Zurich, Geneva, Frankfurt, speak about the role, the critical role that we played in global diplomacy, the sort of middleman that we played. So it's not simply textbooks or treaties that discuss the role that India played as a mediator. Even our flight schedules represent this position right in the middle of the spectrum, trying to maintain peace with people on both sides. Now, the insight that this photograph gives us is not only the transformations between then and now, but even the transformations then. The regular kinds of flights that were scheduled, the way they were scheduled, how often they were scheduled, tell us a lot about our relations with certain states. Now, historic photographs, the reason why they appeal to me is not simply transformations within a certain nation, but also transformations between places, between spheres. I'm sure you've seen this famous photograph. This is a photograph from the 1980s of Bill Gates and Paul Allen as they crowd around the Microsoft computers. It's one of the first founding images of Microsoft, and it is definitely a symbol of innovation, of computer technology, of the new modern world. It is certainly an image that most entrepreneurs look up to and are inspired by. But in the very same year, across the Pacific, we have these men doing the exact same thing. That, my friends, is the founding company Infosys. In the same year as that photograph was taken, you can see them crowding around. We can see Narayan Murthy, their founder, crowd around the very same kind of device that Microsoft was developing, starting their very own company halfway across the world in India. The modernized revolution, the revolution of computer technology was happening there as well. And if you break them down, it's essentially the same thing. What we have is nerds from two parts of the world creating nerdy devices, looking nerdily into a camera, smiling awkwardly, founding a company that made significant difference, significant change, that revolutionized the way computer technology works, not only in their respective countries, but also their worlds. This comparison of photographs between time, this understanding of the transformations that took place between then and now, and between these places, is what defines historic photographs. Now, as I approach my conclusion, I'd like to bring out a few points. Firstly, the fact that a lot of these photographs were taken by amateurs. They weren't planned staged photographs taken for magazines or taken by professional photojournalists. They were photographs taken by amateurs that were supposed to be shared in personal photo galleries, in their own personal albums. They weren't meant to be seen by the vast majority of the public. And that really makes us think. In the world of 1960s America, in the world of 1960s India, a camera was definitely a rare commodity. Taking photographs, capturing, storing, and allowing them to survive for so long was rare. But in today's world, in 2019, if you look into your pocket, you can see a camera capable of much more. 1,000 hours of footage, high definition quality. You can take photographs like this, and you do. And it really makes us wonder, to what extent are the photographs we're taking and the role that we're playing in collecting this great database of photographs impacting the way future historians look at our society and look at us as a people? Could the selfie you took this morning, the mirror image you took this morning, the class photograph you took last year, be the representation, the symbol of what 2019's youth were? And secondly, the fact that a lot of these historic photographs, most of them, were ones that people stumbled across. Particularly the one of the Iranian woman with the birthday cake, the one of the Korean man clenching his hands in pain. These weren't photographs that were meant to be published. They were photographs that were discovered. And they challenged historic perceptions, they changed the way we look at the histories of the world, and they allowed the masses, the world, to understand these historic nuances that very often only historians get to witness. So I would like to urge you, welcome you, to actually explore these for yourself. I have a few links up on screen, which are open archives of millions and millions of historic photographs collected from thousands of sources. And I would like to urge you to step up, to go to these websites, go to these galleries, and have a look. And maybe you'll stumble across something that challenges your perception of the past. Because at the end of the day, history is but a thread of time that ties together the past, the present, and the future. It is not stipulated by simply wars or great leaders. It is a continuous thread of time. Not only are we contributing to it, we can look back and maybe understand who we were, how we are right now, and quite possibly who we are going to become. Thank you very much.